Hey, Cal Prairie, it's Pastor Chris, and I'd like to welcome you guys to our online service. I am so excited that you guys are here. Today's message is an interesting one. The title of this message is Easter Hangover. And I'll try to give you a little bit of a context of where that title comes from. But it actually comes from my experience having run marathons and helped train others to run marathons. See, running a marathon is this unique experience because most training plans are between 16 and 20 weeks long, and they involve a lot of running. You're usually out doing some form of exercise 5 to 6 days a week. And so it becomes your life. For those 4 months leading up to it, you eat, sleep, and breathe marathon training. It changes how you eat. When you know that you're going to get up on Saturday and run 16 miles, you don't go out for burritos and beer on Friday night. It changes how you organize your schedule, knowing that you're going to be sore on certain days, that you're going to need this amount of time to run on certain days. All that to say, your whole life becomes focused on that singular goal of running a marathon, of crossing that finish line. And so you put in the work. And then that day comes and you wake up early, you go to the race, you spend hours standing in line to use the porta potty, and then the gun goes off and you start running. And it is a roller coaster. At times you feel good, at times you feel bad, at times you hurt so bad you want to quit, but then you keep going and you eventually get to where you cross that finish line and you have given everything you have to getting there. Like all those early mornings, all those long Saturdays, all that discipline and training and structure, all of it led up to that moment of crossing that finish line. And you stumble across it, and then they put a medal around your neck, and you celebrate, and you find your family, you find your friends, and you cheer, and you yell, and it is awesome. And then you wake up the next day. And it's this weird feeling. One, because every muscle in your body hurts. But two, you don't have to run. Like, you don't have a scheduled workout that day. You can have whatever you want for breakfast. You've earned it. But in your mind, there's this like, what's next? Like this thing that I had been working up to, leading up to for 4 months is now done, and I'm left wondering where I go from here. It's almost got a kind of postpartum blues kind of vibe to it, of everything in your life built up to this moment, and then that moment happened, and then you're left wondering what's next. And in the church world, Easter sometimes feels like that. From about Christmas on, you are focused on Easter. You know that is going to be the Sunday that we celebrate the resurrection, the pinnacle of the Christian story, the moment where Jesus went to the cross, died for our sins, and then walked out of the tomb, was resurrected so that we could experience resurrection. And you're going to see more people that day than any other Sunday of the year. That is the week that everybody drags their family, their friends. Like there are people I haven't seen for 364 days and they are back. And you know that's going to be the case, and you focus so much energy on making that Sunday the best that it can be. And last week was that Sunday, and it was amazing. We had over, between the two services, here in person, we had over 428 people, plus our online audience. And I mean, second service, standing room only. We ran out of communion supplies. The music was good. The sermon was good. Like, it was just amazing. And here we are, the Sunday afterward. And while I'm pre-recording this, I don't know how many we're going to have on Sunday morning. I'm guessing it's going to be less than 428. And so as a pastor, as a church leader, there's this kind of feeling of, well, the big thing happened. What's next? And so I began to think about that, and I began to wonder, is it possible that other Christians might feel, at least in some seasons of our life, that same kind of feeling, that same kind of hangover, that the thing that they were building up to has happened and it's over, and what's next? And then I began to wonder, is it possible that any of the disciples, the followers of Jesus in the Bible, is it possible that any of them experienced that after experiencing the resurrection? Having followed Jesus for 3 years, seeing the miracles, the casting out demons, hearing the messages, preaching the good news, bonding, becoming as close as they did, and then Jesus dies, and then Jesus is resurrected, and then Jesus is preparing to ascend into heaven. And is it possible that any of the disciples were left wondering what's next? And so I began to dig around in the Bible and ask, is there some disciple that can maybe relate to this experience and help us when we find ourselves in that place? And I think I have a story to share with you guys today. When I began to look for which story to go with, there were several to choose from. There are several moments where Jesus engages with the disciples after his resurrection. At the end of the book of Luke, there's this story we often call the Emmaus Road, where a group of disciples are out walking to a city called Emmaus. It's about a 7-mile journey, and as they're walking, Jesus shows up beside them, but they don't recognize Jesus, and so Jesus is asking all these questions about what happened in Jerusalem, and they're like, "You're probably the only person who doesn't know," and they tell him, and there's almost a little humor kind of built into the story, and then eventually they invite Jesus in, and he breaks bread. He has communion with them, and when he does, they recognize him, and it's this moment. So I could have gone with that. In the other Gospels, there's these several experiences where they're behind locked doors in a room, and all of a sudden Jesus appears, and they hear from him. In one of those encounters, there's even a disciple named Thomas who's like really doubting that it's actually Jesus, and Jesus invites him to feel the holes in his hand, and then he believes. So I could have preached on either of those, but there's another story at the very end of the book of John. It's a story that I'm going to be honest, I've preached on before, so I was a little hesitant to go there again, but the more I thought about it, the more I prayed about it, the more I realized that there's still more in this story for us to pick up on than maybe we've done so before. Like God's still using this story to speak to us. And so that's the story we're going to tell. It's a story found in John 21. And we're going to start in verse 3. And it's the story really based around Peter. And we'll get into his background here in a second. But verse 3 begins like this. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "And we'll come too," they all said, referring to the other disciples. So they all went out in a boat, but they caught nothing all night. Now that opening line there is actually pretty profound when Peter says, "I'm going fishing." You need to understand that Peter is not a recreational fisherman. This is not Peter saying, "It's been a long week. This Saturday, I'm going to go onto the lake. I'm going to drink beer and spend some time fishing and relaxing and clear my mind." That is not what Peter is doing here. Peter, before he met Jesus, well, he was a fisherman. That's what he did for a living. In fact, when we first see him in the story in the Gospels, he's out fishing with his dad. He had grown up in the Jewish educational system, but hadn't decided to pursue higher education, or maybe he wasn't chosen to pursue higher education, and so he went back and took on the family business. He became a fisherman alongside of his dad, and that's where he was at. And then Jesus, which just had to be crazy, like Jesus, this up-and-coming rabbi that people are starting to talk about, who's out there performing miracles and casting out demons and preaching a new kind of message, and is drawing all this attention and even controversy, and he's got this huge following. Like, he comes up to Peter one day and he says, "Hey, if you want, you can stop fishing for fish and I'll teach you how to fish for people." Like, I'll teach you how to bring people into this net we call the kingdom of God. Come, follow me. And Peter does. He begins to follow Jesus, and that kicks off a 3-year journey of spending time with Jesus, of listening to the teachings, praying with him, hearing all the stories, sitting around the campfire at night, joking around. Like, they probably had inside jokes. Jesus even gave Peter a nickname. Like, these guys were tight. There's even one story where Jesus goes up on this mountain, and it's this kind of supernatural experience where they see 2 of the great prophets sitting there, and he invited Peter to come up and to be a part of that. Like, he was there with Jesus for those 3 years. Like, that was his life. And then everything that we talk about when we talk about Holy Week happens. And Peter finds himself, I think, with a lot of inner turmoil, a lot of uncertainty. And that's where we find him in the story. And so when Peter says, I'm going fishing, he's not saying I need a break. He's saying I'm breaking away from this Jesus thing and I'm going back to my old life. I'm going to go back to what I was doing before I met Jesus. In a way, he was saying, I'm done with Christianity. And at this point, I actually kind of find Peter to be a very relatable character. I connect with him, and I think maybe some of you would too if you kind of knew what was going on in his head. And see, I've wondered that a lot. Like, what is it that's caused him to give up, to go back to his old life? And as I was preparing this, I think there are probably like 3 things that I think might be playing out here. One, maybe Peter realized that Christianity is hard, that the faith doesn't always make your life easier, that, well, for Peter, he was being condemned by religious leaders and chased around by Roman soldiers. People didn't like him because of his faith, because of his relationship with God. And maybe it just felt too hard. And maybe some of you felt that before. Maybe Christianity was pitched to you as something that was going to make your life easier, but it's kind of made your life harder. Like, there are all these things that the faith demands of us that aren't easy. Like love, even when it hurts. Love your neighbor. And then Jesus gives us all these commands that over the last several years have become more controversial, more political. Like when Jesus says to feed the hungry, or to provide health care to the poor, or to welcome in the stranger, to visit the prisoner or visit the sick, or to take up the call of the least of these, or to engage with those who are on the fringe of society that are often rejected. And well, doing those things can make a lot of enemies, can ruffle a lot of feathers. Christianity isn't easy. I think it's worth it, but it's not easy. It can be really hard. And maybe that's where Peter finds himself, just, man, this faith is harder than I thought it was going to be. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I'm going back to my old life. Or maybe it was that Christianity was disappointing, that it didn't turn out to be what he thought it was going to be. I mean, Jesus spent all this time walking around talking about this kingdom of God where he was going to be king, where things were going to be different. And you have to understand that the people he's talking to, like, they live in Israel, but Rome is in control. Rome is installing all the leaders. Rome is making all the rules and the laws. And the people don't have much of a say. They don't feel like their voice is heard. And so when Jesus comes along and starts talking about a new kingdom and a new king in a different way, like, they're thinking literally, like, he's gonna come into power and things are going to change. And in fact, two of the disciples at one point get into an argument with each other about who was going to get to sit next to Jesus when Jesus was on the throne. That's how literal they thought it was. And so when Palm Sunday comes and Jesus is riding into the capital city, Jerusalem, and people are cheering and yelling Hosanna, which means save us. I mean, it would not be hard for the disciples to think this is it. He is going into the capital to take over, to take his seat on the throne, to be in control. A new king and a new kingdom. Like, that's what's happening. And then, of course, Holy Week plays out the way that it does. Where Jesus isn't made king, he's arrested. He doesn't take over Rome. He's hung from a Roman cross and he dies. Yeah, he's resurrected, but he's still not king of a new kingdom in the way that they were thinking. Maybe Peter was just disappointed that Christianity didn't turn out to be what he thought it was going to be. And man, I relate with that. Because sometimes we think that God is going to do one thing and God does another. Like I remember 12 years ago, I got an opportunity to take on a job with World Vision, this organization that I have a huge passion for. I've been volunteering for, and they offered me a job in their Chicago office. And so Sally and I, we pack up and we move up there. And when I start, I think this is going to be the place that I retire from. This is my calling. This is it. This is where God wants me. And then we're in the middle of an economic crisis. And we can barely afford rent, and then gas is like $5 a gallon, and the grocery store is outrageous. And then Sally got pregnant, but started having some health issues and had to have an emergency surgery in her second trimester. And she was having a hard time finding work, and my work didn't pay a ton, and we were just struggling. Like we were drowning in debt. Nothing was going as planned. And then I felt this calling to go back to seminary, and we ended up leaving Chicago. And I just remember walking away from that thinking, this is not what I thought God was doing. Have you ever had a situation like that? Or even before that, I remember standing in a hospital room looking at this man on life support, not knowing what was going to happen, and praying all night till I lost my voice that God would save my grandpa, the man I admired more than any other man in the world, that God would save him, that he would bring him out of that. And I believe that God can do miracles. Of course you can heal him, God. So would you please do that so that he can continue to teach me about you, about the faith, and that he can meet my future wife and my future child and be a part of our lives and be the influence in their lives that he's been in mine. And God, I'm not ready to try to live without him. Would you just please save him? And I know you can, because you're God. And he didn't. And my grandpa passed away. Maybe some of you can relate to that. I once saw a Christian bumper sticker that drove me crazy to the point that my left eye started to twitch. And you know what it said? God will never let you down. Man, I remember reading that and thinking, that's a lie. That's not true. God has let me down so many times. God has disappointed me. Now, I say that not because God wasn't good enough, but because God's actions didn't meet my expectations. That I thought that God was going to do one thing and he did another, and I was disappointed. I was let down. And if you meet anybody who says that has never happened to them in their faith, then I have to question how real and vibrant their faith is. Because that's what happens in relationships when we don't meet each other's expectations. We let each other down. That's just how it is. And maybe Peter was feeling that. Maybe he thought this whole faith Jesus thing was going to be one thing, but it ended up being another. Maybe he thought God was going to do one thing, but God did another. So he's like, I'm going to go back to my old life. Or maybe he felt like he had disappointed God to the point that he didn't want to try anymore. Yeah, see, we'll touch on this here in a second, but if you go back in the story, if you were here on Monday, Thursday, we had that new service this year, and it was really powerful. We did foot washing, and then we took communion, not at the same time, two different activities, and it was powerful. And the whole night is focused on this part of the story in John 13, where Jesus sits down with the disciples in this upper room to have what we now call the Last Supper, this thing that we use as the basis for communion, and he washes their feet, and he breaks bread, has wine. And while they're at the table there, Peter confesses his unwavering support of Jesus. He even says, I will die for you. Like, that's how much I believe in you. And then Jesus looks at him and says, no, in fact, you're actually going to deny me 3 times in the next 24 hours. Like, you're going to act like you don't even know me. And you know what? That's exactly what happens. Jesus is taken away, and Peter is trying to figure out what to do, and he's confronted 3 different times, and 3 different times he denies that he even knows Jesus. I can't imagine what a failure he felt like. I mean, I've let God down, and it's a horrible feeling. I've never let Jesus down to his face, so I can only imagine how much more extreme that felt. And I know that's not a unique feeling. I know other people have felt that too. Now, I have a friend of mine, one of my best friends growing up, and every once in a while she'll be in the area and come hear me preach, but the truth is she's not actively involved in church, and her faith is much more complicated than it used to be, and she doesn't know exactly what she believes, and she often jokes with me that I'm a little scared to go into your church because I think I might burst into flames. And while it's a joke, I know that there's a little bit of truth behind that she really does worry that if this whole thing is real, then I've disappointed God so much that I don't even know if I want to try anymore. Like, I can't imagine what God thinks about me. And maybe you've been there. And maybe Peter was there. And so he says, I'm going to go back to my old life. Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going on in his head. I don't know if it's Christianity was too hard, or Christianity was too disappointing, or he felt like he had disappointed God too much. But whatever the reason, he says, I'm going back to my old life. I'm going fishing. And the other disciples join him because he's always been a leader. So here they are still following him. And they're out there fishing. And it says here in verse 4, at dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who it was. And he called out, fellows, have you caught any fish? No, they replied, which you know that had to be frustrating. Here, Peter's like, I'm going to go back to my old life. And then he realizes, I'm horrible at my old life. I'm not catching anything. And then he said, throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat and you'll have some. So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then it says, and the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. Like it's Jesus. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he'd stripped for work, and he jumped into the water and headed to the shore. Like, you have to know the other guys in the boat were like, dude, we would have rowed you in. But Peter couldn't wait. He just had to get to Jesus. All that inner turmoil and frustration, he probably didn't even know why, but he just knew that he needed to talk to Jesus. There was something inside of him drawing him to that. It says the others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore. for they were only about 100 yards from shore. And when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. It says, "Bring me some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to shore, and there were 153 large fish. They counted them. And yet the net hadn't torn. "Now come have some breakfast," Jesus said, and none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them bread and fish. It says this was the third time Jesus appeared to the disciples since he had been raised from the dead. And then we have this conversation that I want us to look at because I think it helps us find a little bit of resolution in this story, something I think we can apply before we go today. It says, after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And scholars have debated for years over what Jesus was referring to when he said these. Some people think it was the other disciples. Do you love me more than these guys? Now, I've always found that to be a kind of weird interpretation because, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like the kind of question you would ask. Do you love me more than your brother does? Do you love me more than your sister does? It just doesn't feel right. So I actually think that the these in this story are the 153 large fish laying on the sand next to them, lined up, this huge display. And he's not asking Peter, "Do you love me more than the fish love me?" He's asking Peter, "Do you love me more than your old life? Even an old life as successful as this. Do you love me more than that?" It says, "Yes," Peter replied, "you know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Then Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said, "you know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" It says Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. You know, he made the connection, the parallel. I denied Jesus 3 times, so now he's asking me 3 times for sure if I love him. Jesus was confronting what happened, but also giving him an opportunity to kind of redeem himself, to let go of that. It says, Simon, Peter said, "Lord, you know everything, and you know I love you." And then Jesus says, "Then feed my sheep." So the advice that Jesus gives to Peter in this moment when Peter's trying to decide whether he's going to go back to his old life or that he's going to stick with Jesus, stick with Christianity, he tells him to feed my lambs, to take care of my sheep, to feed my sheep. Now, if you paid attention during our last sermon series where we talked about the I am statements of Jesus, there were 2 weeks that were really focused on the idea of Jesus being a shepherd and how the Bible often uses sheep or lambs to talk about his children, his people. And here Jesus is saying, you take care of them, you feed them. In other words, you be the shepherd. You do the things that I have been doing. Be like me. How crazy and powerful is that? And I think it's in that we find out what it is that we can do when we feel that hangover, when we feel that moment in our faith where it feels like the best days are behind us and maybe we realize how hard it is or how disappointing it can be, or we feel like we've disappointed God and we want to quit. And I think that the answer that Jesus gives is to do what I have been doing. One of the ways that I love to say this is that Jesus was resurrected not only so that we could be resurrected, but that we could also be a part of resurrecting others, that we could go into people's lives or into situations that are dead and bring life into them. There's this crazy passage after Jesus has that Maundy, Thursday experience, that Last Supper. He's teaching the disciples this series of very passionate teachings. And in that, there's a verse that has always caught my attention in chapter 14. Verse 12, he says, "I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done and even greater works because I am going to the Father." Like, how crazy is it that Jesus tells them that you're going to do the same things I've been doing and even greater? And what did he mean by that? Because most of us aren't walking on water or feeding 5,000. What did he mean by that? And here's what I think he meant. Jesus was this first century Palestinian, poor Jewish boy who was a rabbi and teaching in this small area of the world. He had a limited reach. There was a certain amount of people that would listen to him. But then there were also a lot of people that wouldn't have that opportunity. There were people outside of that demographic that wouldn't have heard the good news from him. That's true today. There are people all over the world of all different backgrounds who listen to some people and not listen to others. There are people out there who wouldn't listen to me because they don't speak my language, or they don't have any respect for me, or they're not a part of my traditions, or for whatever reason. They wouldn't hear the good news from me, but they'd hear it from somebody else. They would hear it from one of their peers, somebody who can speak their language, who can relate to them, who can help bring resurrection into their life in a way that I can't, or even Jesus couldn't because of when and where he lived. And so maybe what Jesus is saying is that, Peter, I need you to go out there and reach the people that I haven't had an opportunity to reach. I need you to care for those sheep, to feed those lambs. I need you to help resurrect those communities, to bring life into those dead places. And when you do that, that's when you get over the hangover. That's when you find new meaning, new purpose. And what I'm wondering is if maybe God is asking us to do that. Maybe that's what he wants us to do after Easter. To not just take the resurrection and celebrate it, but live it. To be resurrected and then to go out and try to bring resurrection into other places. To places that Jesus, at least in his physical form, couldn't go. People that he couldn't reach, people that I can't reach, people that Pastor Dan can't reach, people that only you can reach. I truly believe there are people out there that you are one of the only people that could bring resurrection into their life the way that they need it. And that's what it looks like for you to take care of the sheep, to feed the lambs. We have this saying that we often use here at Cobb Prairie, a saying that's true, that's resonated with a lot of people, this idea that there's a seat for you. It's this idea that there's a seat for everybody at God's table. No matter who you are, you're welcome. But see, once you realize that there's a seat for you, the journey doesn't end there. It doesn't end with you sitting in the seat eating. The journey gets really exciting when then you realize you can go out and tell other people that there's a seat for them. And then we start running out of room at the table, and God starts needing people to help build a bigger table. He needs people to help host the party, to serve the new people that are coming in and sitting at the table, that are realizing that there's a seat for them. See, you're not just resurrected to be resurrected, but to help resurrect others. And it's when we do that we find meaning and purpose. And we realize that even if the big event has already happened, the story's not over. The best days are yet to come because there's more work to do, more resurrection to experience. So that is my hope for us as a church and for each of you. Thanks for joining us this morning.